Have you ever witnessed a moment where one person's quiet dignity changed everything? This is the story of Major John Barrett, a tale that will grip your heart from the start. I'm sorry, sir, but due to an equipment change, we've reassigned your seat. You're now in 33B, middle seat economy. Major John Barrett looked down at the flimsy boarding pass, then at his original first-class ticket bought by his granddaughter for a White House ceremony. There must be a mistake, he said, his voice calm, steady. The agent just shrugged. Aircraft changes happen, sir. This is your seat now. No apology, no recognition, just a cold reassignment. 8 minutes later, the terminal stirred, passengers turned, assists rushed, and at the center of it all, a man in a suit with sweat on his brow, the airline's CEO charging toward the gate. Where is he? He demanded. Where is Major John Barrett? Can you imagine the surprise that unfolded next? Major John Barrett didn't talk much about the war, not because he had forgotten it, but because he remembered too much. At 84, the battle scars weren't visible to the casual eye, but they lived in his spine in the way he shifted slowly in chairs and in the quiet way he scanned every room he entered. He had served with distinction in Vietnam as a Special Forces officer, a leader known not just for his bravery under fire, but for his ability to bring his men back home, even when the odds said otherwise. Now, decades later, he lived a quiet life in the outskirts of Des Moines, Iowa, a modest house, a dog named Duke, a worn flag that still flew out front even on the bitterest days of winter. His world had gotten smaller over the years. Friends gone. His wife Helen passed 5 years back. His only close family now was his granddaughter, Captain Emily Barrett, a logistics officer stationed out of Fort Carson, Colorado. She was the one who kept him grounded in the present. The rest of the world, it seemed, had moved on, but Emily hadn't forgotten. When she heard her grandfather had been invited to a special White House event honoring Medal of Honor recipients, she didn't hesitate. She used every airline mile she had, dipped into her savings, and secured him a first-class ticket on Trans-Meridian Airlines. She knew his back pain made long flights difficult. And more than that, she knew he deserved the kind of recognition he would never ask for. Grandpa, she told him on the phone, this isn't about luxury. It's about dignity. John chuckled softly. You always were the idealist, Em. Just accept it, she said. You've earned it. He had. And yet, John never quite saw it that way. He had always felt that the real heroes were the ones who didn't make it back. The ones whose names were etched into Blackstone in Washington, but he wasn't about to rob his granddaughter of the pride she felt in doing this for him. So he packed his suit, polished the shoes he rarely wore, and made the long drive to the airport 2 hours early, just like he used to arrive for formation. The airport was busy. Overhead speakers crackled with boarding calls. People rushed by heads down, glued to phones. No one noticed the elderly man with a soft limp carrying a worn leather duffel and wearing a jacket that sat just a little too square on shoulders that had carried too much. He didn't expect special treatment. He wasn't looking for applause, but somewhere deep down he thought maybe, just maybe, the system would remember. That a confirmed seat meant something. That service, sacrifice, and honor still had weight. But in today's world, loyalty is measured in points, not valor. The airline cared less about the battles he survived and more about the credit card in his wallet. Corporate algorithms didn't salute anyone. And so began the quiet unraveling of a man's dignity, not in gunfire or chaos, but in a few keystrokes at a gate. The terminal was alive with movement, a constant tide of rolling suitcases, murmured gate changes, and the sharp electronic chirp of boarding passes being scanned. Major John Barrett moved slowly but deliberately through the chaos. His back slightly stiff, his shoulders squared by decades of discipline. He reached gate 28 with plenty of time, ticket in hand, as he had always done early, prepared respectfully. Behind the podium stood Denise, a veteran gate agent whose posture matched the rigid lines of her navy blazer. Her tone was professional but distant, the kind developed after years of dealing with entitled travelers in corporate deadlines. At her side was Kyle, younger, newer, and visibly more nervous, his eyes darting between the computer screen and the boarding crowd. John stepped forward and handed over his boarding pass seat to a first class. It had been booked months ago and confirmed twice. He wasn't someone who expected red carpets, but a window seat with some legroom and a bit of peace that was reasonable for a man flying across the country with a bad back and a quiet mission of honor. Denise scanned the pass. The screen blinked red. She frowned. Without looking up, she began typing. Click, click, click. Then without warning, she reached for a flimsy printout and held it out toward John. There's been an aircraft change, she said flatly. The new configuration has fewer first-class seats. He looked at the paper in her hand. 33B middle seat economy. There must be a mistake, he said calmly. This was confirmed. My granddaughter, it's not a mistake, Denise interrupted, her tone, now clipped with impatience. You were booked using loyalty miles, not cash fare. That puts you lower in the priority queue when changes happen. We had to reassign several passengers. Your new seat is 33B. John glanced down at the slip. He didn't speak for a moment. The hum of the terminal buzzed in his ears like static. I'm traveling to Washington for a Medal of Honor event, he said slowly. It's noted in the reservation, Denise shrugged. It doesn't override our seating policies. Priority goes to full fare Diamond members. Kyle looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. He opened his mouth to say something, but Denise's sideways glance silenced him. No apology, no recognition, just a cold corporate rooting. John took the pass. Thank you, he said, because manners were something you didn't discard, even when others had. Major John Barrett found a seat near the window of the crowded gate area. It wasn't quiet, but at least he could look out onto the tarmac and let his thoughts drift somewhere beyond the glass. In his lapse at the crumpled economy boarding pass, 33B middle seat. The slip of paper seemed almost symbolic, as if everything he had given, everything he had endured, could now be condensed into a code on a flimsy printout. He didn't speak. He didn't protest. That part of him, the soldier who once barked orders under gunfire, had long since learned when silence was more powerful than argument. Around him, the world went on. Business travelers juggled phone calls and laptops. Families chased after toddlers. People laughed, sighed, stretched, scrolled. No one noticed the elderly man sitting alone in a navy blazer, one hand resting on a battered duffel bag, the other gently rubbing a sore spot near his lower spine. He thought briefly about calling Emily his granddaughter, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. She'd worked so hard to make this trip comfortable for him, sacrificing time, money, and sleep. He didn't want her to feel like she'd failed. And more importantly, he didn't want to give the system the satisfaction of breaking his pride even through her. So, he sat in silence, breathing through the weight in his chest. He remembered other moments like this, not with gate agents, but with bureaucrats, VA officers, distant stars at job interviews after the war. He'd learned long ago that respect wasn't always something the world gave freely. Sometimes you had to carry it for yourself, even when no one else saw it. He glanced back at gate 28, where Denise was scanning another passenger's ticket with mechanical efficiency. Kyle was there, too, avoiding eye contact. John didn't hate them. They were part of the machine trained to serve policies, not people. And that's what stung the most. This wasn't about luxury. It wasn't even about comfort. It was about recognition. Not applause or celebration. Just the simple decency of being treated like someone whose service still meant something. And right now, the system had made it clear it didn't. John Barrett sat quietly by the terminal window, watching a baggage cart crawl across the tarmac. The dull ache in his lower back pulsed with each passing minute, but he ignored it. The old injury was just part of the deal now. He shifted in his seat, carefully folding the economy boarding pass and slipping it into the inner pocket of his blazer. His mind drifted to Emily. She would be heartbroken if she knew. She'd gone to such lengths to make this trip special, to make him feel like more than just an old man on a plane. She knew how rare it was for him to travel anymore, especially long distance. The only reason he even agreed was because it mattered to her. It had been her way of saying, "Grandpa, I see you." He reached into his wallet for a tissue to wipe his glasses, and that's when he saw it. A small business card tucked between receipts and worn IDs. On it in Emily's neat handwriting were 4 words, "Call this if needed." Printed above that was a logo: Trans-Meridian Airlines Heroes Liaison Desk. He stared at it for a long moment, unsure. He had never been one to call special numbers. Never expected exceptions. But her voice echoed in his mind from a conversation weeks earlier. If anything goes wrong, Grandpa, you don't argue. You call that number. It bypasses everything. It's meant for people like you, people like him. He hesitated, then pulled out his phone. His hands moved slowly, deliberately, as if each motion needed approval from his pride. He dialed the number. 2 rings, then a voice. Trans-Meridian Heroes Liaison. This is David. How may I assist you today? John straightened slightly in his chair. Yes, my name is Major John Barrett. I had a confirmed first-class ticket on Flight 714 to Washington. I've been downgraded. I am traveling for a Medal of Honor ceremony. There was a pause on the other end. Not the kind that signals disinterest, but the kind where someone realizes they're suddenly on sacred ground. Yes, sir. May I please confirm your booking number and gate location? John gave the information. Please hold, Major Barrett. The silence was different this time, less hollow. He could hear typing, rapid, focused. Then the voice returned. Major Barrett, I see your record and I see what just happened. Sir, I deeply apologize. This is absolutely not how this should have been handled. The equipment change was real, but your seating reassignment did not follow the appropriate protocol for our distinguished veteran guests, especially those attending federal honor ceremonies. I'm escalating this right now. Please remain at gate 28. You'll be assisted shortly. John blinked. Thank you, he said softly, unsure what else to say. Sir David replied, voice steady and sincere. Thank you. We'll fix this. The call ended. John placed the phone back in his pocket and looked around. The boarding area continued on unaffected. No one knew what had just happened. That somewhere behind the polished walls and polished smiles, someone had finally seen him. He didn't let himself hope too much. He'd lived long enough to know how promises often disappeared into red tape. But something about David's voice, something about the way he'd said, "We'll fix this," had the ring of action, not apology. And so for the first time since the downgrade, Major John Barrett leaned back in his chair, lifted his gaze from the floor, and waited. Not with bitterness, but with the quiet expectation of a man who had finally dialed the right number. For a while, nothing changed. Major John Barrett sat motionless, his phone resting beside him on the seat. Gate 28 buzzed with its usual rhythm, the mechanical voice overhead announcing boarding groups, a soft roll of luggage wheels, the hushed grumbles of travelers anxious to get where they were going. He didn't expect much. A call like that could disappear into the void like so many promises had over the years. But still, something felt different. There had been something in that voice, David, that made him pause. 7 minutes passed. Then something shifted. It started with a murmur, a ripple of attention moving through the waiting area. People turned their heads. Staff at the gate looked up from their monitors. A security officer near the concourse entrance suddenly straightened. The rhythm of the terminal broke, not with noise, but with urgency. And then they appeared. A small group of people in suits and company badges moving at a brisk pace down the concourse, parting through the crowd with silent intensity. At the center of the group was a tall man in his early 50s, his suit slightly disheveled, sweat glistening at his temples. He looked out of place, not because of his attire, but because of his expression, focused, almost frantic. Elliot Granger, CEO of Trans-Meridian Airlines, didn't slow down until he reached the gate podium. Denise froze mid-scan. Kyle stepped back instinctively. A hush fell over the gate as passengers stared, unsure of what was happening. Where is he? Granger asked sharply, voice controlled, but intense. Denise blinked, then gestured uncertainly toward the seats near the window. He's that man over there? Granger didn't wait. He crossed the floor in long strides and came to a stop in front of John. John looked up, unsure of who this man was, why he looked so urgent. Major Barrett, the man said, lowering his voice. Sir, I'm Elliot Granger. I'm the president of Trans-Meridian. John gave a slow nod. I want to offer you my most sincere apology for what just occurred. Your reassignment was not only a mistake, it was a complete failure of our values and our internal protocol. I take full responsibility. John opened his mouth to respond, but Granger continued before he could. We are holding the flight. You will be escorted directly to the first-class cabin and not just to any seat. We are rearranging the cabin to accommodate you properly. If that means removing one of our own executives, so be it. Behind Granger, one of his assistants was already on the phone, nodding quickly as they coordinated the new seating plan. John looked around. People were watching now. Passengers, crew, even other staff. Not with mockery, not with pity, with respect, with awe. Granger straightened. Major Barrett, it should never have come to this. But I promise you, from this moment forward, your name will not be forgotten in our system. He reached into his coat pocket and handed John a leather folder. This is a lifetime voucher. Any travel you or your family ever take with Trans-Meridian will be fully covered in our highest service class. Consider it a small token for what we fail to honor today. John blinked slowly, then nodded. Thank you, he said, his voice even, but touched with something deeper. Not pride, not gratitude, but recognition. The kind that said, you saw me. Finally, as the entourage guided him toward the jet bridge, passengers stepped aside. Some clapped, others simply watched in silence. The old soldier didn't wave. He didn't bow. He simply walked straight back, steady with dignity fully restored. Flight 714 eventually took off 23 minutes behind schedule, but no one on board seemed to mind. In fact, most passengers looked toward seat 1A with an unusual sense of reverence, knowing exactly who sat there. Major John Barrett reclined slightly, eyes closed, the tension in his shoulders finally softened. The airline CEO, Elliot Granger, had personally escorted him down the jet bridge, waited until he was seated, and ensured the cabin crew addressed him with care. No scripted greetings, no mechanical gestures, just genuine respect. Back at the terminal, however, the fallout had only just begun. Within the hour, an emergency meeting convened on the executive floor of Trans-Meridian's headquarters. The situation wasn't treated as a PR incident. It was a cultural breach. Granger stood at the head of the boardroom, his voice firm, but level as he addressed his senior team. This wasn't a mistake in booking. This was a mistake in recognition. Our internal systems failed to flag a Medal of Honor recipient traveling for an official government event. Worse, our frontline staff weren't trained to know how to respond when someone like that is standing right in front of them. His words were met with silence. The executives around the table were seasoned, hardened by spreadsheets, shareholder meetings, and quarterly targets. But none of that mattered now. Granger continued, from this moment forward, we implement a new protocol. If any veteran traveling under distinguished circumstances is flagged in our system, that case gets immediate executive review. And I want a manual override procedure, something that bypasses algorithmic seating logic. He turned to the vice president of customer experience. And I want empathy training expanded. Not just how to say I'm sorry, but how to see people. The VP nodded, taking notes furiously. It didn't stop there. Denise, the gate agent, who had reassigned John without hesitation, was removed from customer F-facing duties. She wasn't fired, not immediately. Granger believed in accountability, but also in education. She was enrolled in a 6-week retraining program focused on human-centered service with the option to return only upon completion. Kyle, the younger agent, had made a quiet report after the incident. His discomfort hadn't gone unnoticed. He was later commended by an internal memo for his integrity under pressure. Granger arranged a one-on-one conversation with him, ending with a handshake and a promise. We need more people like you out there. Word spread quickly through the company. Emails circulated. Videos of Gurza's public apology at the gate, discreetly recorded by passengers, went viral in veterans forums and social media circles. Many still criticized the airline for letting it happen at all. But others, especially those who had worn a uniform, saw something different. Not a perfect company, but one that had been forced to remember what mattered. Soon a formal internal document was released under the title The Barrett Protocol. It outlined emergency escalation procedures, honor travel guidelines, liaison responsibilities, and a human override clause with one line in bold centered at the top of the page: service before status, people before points. John Barrett never knew the details of what followed. He hadn't asked for policies, procedures, or headlines. He hadn't asked for anything really. But his quiet stand, his refusal to argue, to lash out to demand, had done more than get his seat back. It had shifted something larger. And sometimes the most powerful reforms begin not with protests or press releases, but with the silent dignity of one man who simply refused to disappear. The limousine glided through the tree-lined streets of Washington, D.C., its windows slightly tinted to shield its passenger from the buzzing spring afternoon outside. Inside sat Major John Barrett, hands folded neatly over his lap, the same duffel bag beside him that had followed him from jungles of Vietnam to airport terminals and now the capital of the nation he had served with his life. The city moved around him, cyclists in suits, tourists with cameras, office workers on lunch breaks. But John felt oddly removed from it all. He wasn't here for the buildings or the monuments. He was here for a moment that he had never asked for but had been quietly honored to receive. He arrived at the White House under the careful coordination of military liaison. No flashing cameras, no red carpet, just quiet professionalism and the respectful nods of men and women who recognized the weight of his presence without needing to announce it. In the East Room, the chandeliers sparkled above a small assembly of decorated guests and dignitaries. The event was not broadcast, not made public. It was a private ceremony, a tribute to the living Medal of Honor recipients still with them, and John, though not one for titles or honors, stood with the others, his spine straight, his gaze clear. When his name was called, he moved forward slowly, every step echoing, not just in the hall, but in his own memory. The president shook his hand firmly and said, "Only this, you carried more than most could ever imagine, Major Barrett." "Thank you." The applause was warm, sincere. He nodded once and returned to his seat without fanfare. No long speech, no waving, just presence. After the ceremony, many gathered to chat, to take photographs, to recall shared moments from the past. But John remained mostly quiet. He accepted each handshake with grace, but declined attention. His journey hadn't been about recognition. Not at the airport, not here. That evening, back at his hotel, he sat near the window in a white shirt and slacks, watching the PTOIC shimmer in the fading light. The sun dipped low over Arlington. In the silence, he allowed himself a small breath of peace. Then his phone buzzed. It was a message from Emily. "Heard something went wrong at the gate. Are you okay?" John stared at the screen for a long moment. The memory of the gate, of Denise's cold recitation of the flimsy paper marked 33B flickered back, but so did the image of Elliot Granger kneeling beside him, apologizing not as a CEO, but as a human being. He tapped out a reply. "All good, just a little turbulence on the ground. Cleared up quickly. Ceremony went well. You'd have been proud." He paused, then added, "Thank you, kiddo, for everything." He put the phone down and looked out over the city, the lights blinking softly like distant stars. He didn't need to explain. He didn't need to relive the ordeal. Some things, the pain, the redemption, the quiet strength it took to say nothing at all, weren't meant to be retold. They were meant to be carried. And that night, Major John Barrett didn't feel overlooked or downgraded or forgotten. He felt remembered. The story of Major John Barrett didn't make national headlines. There were no viral hashtags, no press conferences, no late-night segments. But within the quiet corners of military circles, veterans' halls, and airport breakrooms across the country, people talked. They talked about the man who said nothing and changed everything. The Barrett Protocol became more than a policy. It became a reminder that behind every name in a booking system might stand a legacy far greater than a status tier or seat class. That in a world obsessed with upgrades, miles perks, and profit margins, there are still people whose worth can't be calculated in dollars or data. John never flew again after Washington. Not because of bitterness, but because he'd been given exactly what he needed, one final flight, not just with comfort, but with dignity. And in his own way, he wanted to leave it there. On a high note, in peace, he returned to Iowa, resumed his quiet routines, and lived with the same modest grace he always had. He never framed the lifetime pass, never mentioned the CEO again. And when Emily asked about it one last time, all he said was, "They did right by me in the end." That's what matters. But others remembered. Gate agents told the story in training sessions. Airline staff used it as a case study. And on rare occasions when someone tried to downplay the importance of a passenger marked Distinguished Military Honor, someone would lean in and whisper, "Don't forget about Barrett." Because honor, real honor, doesn't ask for attention. It walks quietly until it's called. It doesn't demand first class. It deserves it. And when a system finally recognizes that, when people in power stop and say, "We failed you and we'll fix it," that's not just customer service, that's redemption. So the next time you're at an airport and you see an older man moving slowly through the crowd, don't just look at his boarding pass. Look at him. Because you might be in the presence of someone who carried more than luggage. He carried history. In today's fast-paced world where loyalty is often measured in rewards points and attention spans shrink by the second, the story of Major John Barrett reminds us of something timeless. True respect isn't earned in transactions. It's lived. It's carried. And it's remembered. How often do we walk past someone with silver hair and a slow step without knowing the battles they fought? Not just on foreign soil, but here at home in silence. John didn't ask for more. He simply asked not to be forgotten. Maybe that's the lesson that dignity once lost doesn't scream, it disappears quietly until someone brave enough to stand still makes the world notice. And now we ask you, have you ever witnessed a moment like this when someone's quiet presence shifted an entire system? Do you think today's society still recognizes real sacrifice? Or have we traded honor for convenience? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, especially from our older viewers. Your stories matter. Your experiences remind us of what truly holds this country together. If this story moved you even just a little, please like this video, subscribe to Valor Stories, and share it with someone who still believes in quiet strength and decency. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we remember them. And sometimes remembering is the first act of honor.